Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hello. Hi. I'm the big guy in the blue t-shirt standing at the front waving at you. If you can hear me, wave. There's a lot of deaf people in the room. Come on. Wave at me. I want to see some hands. See some energy here. Come on. Here for a good time, not a long time. You're in a beer stadium, not a conference center. Act appropriately. There we go. Love that. All right, look, we're on for a really fantastically memorable session today. I'm excited to see this one. You know why you're here. I'm not going to give it a big spiel. All I'm going to say is afterwards, do stick around for lunch, have a chat with each other, discuss what you've just seen and understand what you can take away, because there's some really important conversations about to happen here. But without further ado, I'm going to welcome to the stage Eugene Healey.
Hello. I'd invite you all to lend me your ears for the next 45 minutes. We are gathered here today to mourn the loss of a very dear friend to all of us marketers, our ego. Ego is really important, I think, and very dear to us marketers, being that we don't make the tech and finance money that means that we can actually afford to live in the cities that we work in. And also being that we're not quite cool enough to be screenwriters or poets or artists, but just cool enough to run pop-ups where we give out branded hats and tube socks. I think, unfortunately, we've come to a point where it's time to let go of that last remaining ego. Before I do, I'd like to start by remembering the life that our dear ego once had. I think it's good to start with a definition of brand, because there are many of them out there and all of them are correct in different circumstances. The one that I am most fond of is that brand is the sum total associations that people have about a product, company, service, or entity. It's about what people remember of you and how those memories interact when the consumer is actually in market. It's about cognition and emotion. And it's about the creation of intangible value. I think this is why, the CFO is commonly held up as the enemy, because what we have is an asset that doesn't exist on a balance sheet, that can't be quantified, though Interbrand will tell you that it can. It exists external to the organization. It exists effectively in the minds of everyone that comes into contact with us. And once we understand that it's fundamentally about memory and association and the manipulation, the massaging of those key levers, we begin to effectively understand the core principles of brand building and why we invest in brand in the first place. The way that we have built brands to date have relied on these levers of effectively ego and control. And the reason I gave you that definition before, we believed that we could have total control over the brand, which is to say, we believed that we could have total control over the associations that other people held of us. I say ego because that's what we're saying effectively, that this is a model where we believe we can control what other people think of us. And this model was effectively supported by a couple of key principles. One, run it up the chain. So anyone who's ever worked on a brand strategy or a creative campaign will tell you that the majority of the job is getting the work approved. The work is mostly managed by people who are seniors, mid-level brand managers, etc. And then once it's ready to share, we begin that very long and arduous political process of massaging stakeholders further and further up. So we go through steering committees and we go through exec presentations and then we go into board papers, so on and so forth. This takes a really long time, because it acknowledges that because brand is something that everyone feels that they have ownership of, it's something that everyone feels that they have a right to. So the metaphor that I like to use effectively, if you as the CMO or a senior marketer walk into the CFO's office and say, I'd love to have input on next year's financial planning, they would say, you can get the fuck out of here. But if a CFO walks up to you and says, I don't like this brand campaign, or for that matter, the COO or the legal team or the CEO, everyone has effectively a right to poo-poo that particular piece of work. So in each of these conversations, you have to reframe the idea, not in your language, the language that we all speak, which is brand and marketing and memory and association, etc., into their language, because we know that they have, at best, a very loose understanding of brand. And in some instances, they have what I would say is an active disdain for it. They use the word cost center. Cost center is a slur. As a function of that, brands are effectively managed top down. So they're actually managed, I would say, the most effective analogy is that they're managed like militaries. They're managed from a central command post that issues orders that the rank and file have to obey. And once the strategy is set, it has to be enforced to the letter. That means generally that consistency is prioritized over adaptation. And of course, the reason for that is we are trying to establish a sense of control. We're trying to have total control over the associations that we want people to hold of us. And of course, as the function of that, there is a ruthless, almost dogmatic adherence to the brand guidelines. So this is most often, or has been for a very long time, a static document that contains very specific instructions for how your brand can and can't show up in each context. And of course, the better the brand guideline, apparently, like the bigger it is and the more context that it shows. But again, these are effectively your marching orders. And this mid-level brand manager role that many of us occupy or will occupy or have occupied after a campaign or a brand refresh, etc., is effectively to be that of an enforcer. So you're kind of like a cop who's turned off their body cam and you're going around brutalizing your own workforce. That's not the right amount of white space around the logo. Like that's effectively like the role that you're asked to play for your organization. Now, these three rules worked for a very specific set of circumstances that actually held true for a very long amount of time, certainly much longer than all of our own lifespans, but are starting to fall apart now. Number one is a monolithic, monocultural media environment, which is to say a media environment where we all ate from the same cultural diet. We tuned into the same TV channels at the same time each night, and we all watched the same things. And this effectively gave us, as marketers, a single cultural lingua franca for us to work from. There was a universal meaning for icons and symbols and language that could be used and widely understood across very, very large sections of society. And because of that, you could pitch ideas that lived very much in the middle because there were literally more people living in the middle at that particular point in time. Secondly, it also meant that everyone was also there in this particular media environment, which meant budgets could be centralized, which meant we could afford to spend enormous amounts of time and resources on a single piece of creative. Literally, the big ad. Because we knew that everyone was going to eventually see that particular piece of creative. So these long lead times with these extraordinarily long approval cycles would eventually pay off. And then finally, we had minimal creative outputs. So because everyone was centralized in a few key media channels around a few pieces of entertainment, the number of creative outputs that we actually needed to generate was relatively little, which meant there was relatively uncomplicated channel mixes, which meant there was relatively little to approve. And so what we had was a situation where we could effectively see our entire brand within the palm of our hand. And what that meant was that we could control it with an iron fist. So what's changed? Well, first off, that monolithic media environment has experienced not only fragmentation, but hyperfragmentation. So the decline of TV is well documented. In the US alone, the share of viewership to the three major networks has gone from 70% to less than 30% since the 1980s. In Australia, more people now watch YouTube than broadcast television. That shifted at some point last year. But crucially within that metric is a recognition that media environment, it's not just that we've gone from TV to YouTube, these media environments are decentralized, which means we may all be on YouTube, but we are all effectively watching different things. So like the metaphor that I like to use is like, if you want like a modern Sisyphean experience, is try to have a conversation with your coworkers about the media and TV that you're watching. It's like an endless cycle of like, are you watching this? No, but I hear that's good. Are you watching this? No, but I hear that's good. No, that's on my watch list. Yeah. You can have a trend that's got like, you're just like, oh my God, have you seen the new Cat's Eye Gap ad dance? You're like, I have absolutely no, your algorithm is completely different to mine. I'm sorry. I'm getting Indonesian boat kid aura farming. Each platform has its own rules, its own audiences, its own user behavior. So even if it is the same user, so I'm on YouTube versus I'm on TikTok versus I'm on TV, my behavior and my mindset might be completely different. How a brand shows up, therefore, on TikTok is different to Instagram, is different to YouTube, is different to podcasts. So we can't spend all our time and resources on a single piece of creative because literally the audience is distributed across more and more places, but also because it's a decentralized media environment, there is no single cultural lingua franca for us to work off. There are less middle of the road monocultural ideas because the media and the user behaviors and the attitudes are all much more distributed. Then there is the fact that our brand messaging is no longer delivered linear to the consumer. I think like in the 2012s, 2010 to 2020, we talked about the direct-to-consumer era where we really were like, we can forge a direct relationship to the customer and we can effectively ignore all of the media gatekeepers. Like we can go direct to them. What I think we've experienced now is effectively basically the complete opposite. Increasingly, the way that brands make their way to market and get their messages to the consumers is mediated. It's through armies of influencers and curators and gatekeepers and brand partnerships and community building and activations, etc. The IPA, which is kind of like one of the peak bodies for advertising effectiveness in the UK, just found that creator marketing is the most effective form of brand building, more effective than linear television, which I think is like a really insane statistic that I think is going to be quoted for a really, really long time to come, because the IPA are boring. So like if they're able to develop research like that shows how effective creator marketing is, then everyone effectively will take notice. But of course, within that is another statistic, which is that there is wild variation in the efficacy of creator marketing. In many instances, creator marketing builds the creator's brand rather than the brand's brand. But also part of this comes down to control. So some brands still believe that they can effectively treat creators like sock puppets, that you have your wrapping, but it's my words that come out. And this is something that I've experienced not only as a strategist, but also as a creator myself. There are some brands that really believe that there is a message that they need to get to the market. And there are other brands that let you use police brutality metaphors up on stage to prove a point. Accompanying this is the simple fact that the volume of output now far exceeds what traditional approval processes can handle. So once, as I said, brands' sum total output lived within the palm of our hands. Now it's kind of the opposite. Like our collective output exists beyond the horizon line. It was fine when we only had a couple of ads that we had to run up the chain. Like I have a friend who worked at a major super brand, which I won't name, in Australia. And the CEO wanted to approve every single radio ad script. And this is not a guy who had any brand training. He had a background in finance. But now what we have is a situation between your paid, your organic, your digital, your community activations, your partnerships, etc. You've got creator marketing. I spoke to a creator agency who's working with 10,000 creators for an Australian brand this year. Australian brands alone now manage the level of creative output that you would have seen from a global brand 20 years ago. And each ad can be like a massive brand building viral moment, but it can also, as we saw with Dylan Mulvaney and Bud Light, a fraction of a cut down of a campaign also end up as like this kind of like brand equity destroying fuckstorm. And so we have a situation where we still have a governance issue where traditionally we used to de-risk by running things up the chain. It was effectively like the distribution of authority, right? Like I was just following orders. But now we can't work through that situation because there's so much creative output coming through the pipeline that there's going to be bottlenecks at senior levels of the organization. So that intuition and conviction has to be applied further and further down the organization. So I used the metaphor before that brands effectively function top down like the American military. What we need now are brands that effectively function more like the Viet Cong, like they function more like guerrilla cells that are decentralized and have decentralized authority. Finally, we have the fact that the brand conversation itself is now a group chat. It's not a monologue. Previously, we controlled the direction of the messaging. Me, brand, direct message to you, consumer. But with social, it's effectively become peer-to-peer. So we live in a culture which I would say, among many other things, this is stuff that I've made content about in the past, is non-linear. So we consume the conversations around the art and the content at the same time that we consume the content itself. I saw Doja Cat parody the Sydney Sweeney American Eagle ad before I saw the Sydney Sweeney American Eagle ad. I saw people imitating the Cat's Eye Gap ad dancers before I saw the Cat's Eye ad. And at the same time, I was asked to take a position on which one I thought was better. You know, all of these things happen at the same time. So we don't even own the narrative itself anymore. Effectively, what we own is how we respond to the audience once they have determined how they feel about it. So to go back to my original definition, a brand is the sum total associations that people have about a product, an entity, or a service. When you don't own or control the message, when you don't control the medium, when you don't control the mediators, when you don't control the way that message will be received, you don't have control over your brand. You simply cannot assert the level of control that you had beforehand. So effectively what we've gone from is a master-slave relationship, one of total ownership and control, to a parent-teenager relationship. we are a key influencer. We can hope that we shepherded their direction usefully in the past, but we cannot be effectively the architect of their destiny in the same way that we have in the past. So we have to learn to let go. And this is not a case of good versus brand building, what we would like to do. I think it is a reflection. All of these things are happening, right? It's not whether we'd like to participate in them or not. This is the media environment. This is the cultural environment. And so this is a case of what we have to learn to do. So what are some new rules for this era? Well, I'm going to deliver a brand strategy one because I am a brand strategist. The first is to make your brand strategy and creative ideas polysemantic. So semantics comes from semiotics, which is the science of signs. Monosemy means one sign, one meaning. So if I have a gold ring on the fourth finger of my left hand, that means that I am married, right? It only means one thing, effectively. Polysemy means one sign, many meanings. So in this context, it's not thinking through the lens of strategy and creative ideas through, this is going to make a great story. This is going to make a really powerful ad or a really powerful piece of content. It's thinking about this through the lens of polysemy. So from this creative idea, as I assess it, can I make outputs that are applicable across as broad a range of contexts and platforms and budgets and audiences as possible? Is it applicable when translated, mediated through niches and different communities and through creator marketing? Can it be something that makes sense for a creator to deliver when they're just yammering at a camera in their bedroom, or something that may be a massive activation at a festival or a massive TV ad and push, something that would be fit for a Super Bowl and something that would be fit effectively for a community activation? And then as part of that, can it be something that is simple, something that is simple enough that there will be consistency across these very diverse outputs? Because again, recognizing that this is brand building in mediated contexts. So we are brand building with partners who are less experienced with our brand. It's not just me, my brand team, my creative agency who I've worked with for several years. It's me and a 19-year-old kid who picked up a phone and is now getting millions of views, and they have absolutely no idea what the discipline of marketing is, or they've never heard the word distinctive brand assets in their life. They still need to be able to internalize your brand message and communicate it through the lens of their brand. You need to give people with your strategy the least scope possible for it to go wrong. I think an example of a brand that has been accomplishing this really successfully over the last 5 years is McDonald's. And I'm talking about McDonald's Global in this context. So I was at the APG Creative Strategy Awards in London a couple of weeks ago. And this was a brand that was really highlighted as something that was doing really successful long-term creative strategy. The brand strategy has been all about embracing fan truths. So back in 2019, when the new agency was appointed, they were trying to look for a single source of truth, which is what we do, right? When we're building a creative strategy, right? What is the source of truth for this brand? Why does everyone come to McDonald's? What is that universal recognizable idea? And what they did was instead to flip that story and say, we're going to champion instead all of the fan truths, all of the idiosyncratic individual reasons someone might like to come to McDonald's. So that might include these weird, rogue, random menu hacks that only you or a couple of your mates do. It might include things like all of the celebrity collab meals that happened over the past several years, which were effectively just let's bring Travis Scott, or let's bring Sweetie or someone else, or Bad Bunny, etc., into the brand. It was things like gaming and anime collaborations with McDonald's in McDonald's Japan. So this is effectively polysemy in action. So what you have is one brand idea, which is about fan truths, but there are many, many interpretations that is refracted through as part of that process. And I come bringing data, of course. So this is from the creative strategy, the award handbook. So this is, and I had to take a picture of it. I don't have a photocopier at home, sorry. Basically, they had a massive increase from 2019 to 2024, a 5% jump in This Is a Brand I Trust. And they had something like a 10% jump in This Is a Brand for Someone Like Me. So this is, starting to consider consideration and preference scores. And as well, they had a lot of really useful information about sales. So how this actually converted to lower funnel. Sales per restaurant are up 40% versus 2019. So this is a pre-COVID level. Sales are up 40%. From 2017 to 2019, they had a negative 5% drop in traffic. And from 2020 to 2024, they had a 1.4% increase in traffic. So second, investing in distinctive brand assets that can be deployed in any context. So rather than, I was trained at a strategy agency which had 100-page brand guidelines documents. So I feel quite passionately about this. I think we live in a world now which is that's totally fucking ridiculous. Because what that really, we had the length of the brand book because we were effectively saying like, okay, let's optimize for every single scenario, every single thing that any monkey in this company could think of, we're going to have a situation from it. We simply cannot do that anymore. The variety of creative outputs, the variety of places that your brand shows up makes it completely ridiculous. Instead, I think it's better to ensure that your brand has distinctive assets that it can deploy to make itself instantly recognizable, regardless of context. And many of you will be familiar with this brand, but I think it bears repeating for a variety of reasons, which is Loewe. Before I get onto that. So this is a really great piece of research that came from System 1, which is the ad effectiveness platform. And they talked about what are the assets on short form that guarantee strong brand awareness lift. So which are the assets effectively that make your brand distinctive? So distinctiveness being you can recognize the brand as you. And what they found on social, the biggest problem, we're getting quite good now at making platform native entertaining content. The next task is to make entertaining content where we actually get to attribute all of that attention back to us instead of handing it over to TikTok. So what they found is the best assets that created the best brand lift were things like sonic assets. So sonic branding is like going to become much more important as part of social over the next couple of years. I still think it's really slept on. The logo, not the logo slapped on at the bottom, but the logo deployed in actual context. And I'll show you what that looks like in practice. And things like fluent characters and jingles and slogans, etc., are really important as well. So an example of a brand that is really strong at using their products and their distinctive assets in context is the luxury brand Loewe. And I want to show you 3 examples of 3 short form activations that really demonstrate like the diversity of how this can come to life. So what you have there is the logo deployed in the context of effectively trying to tell a traditional craft story. So this is something that is probably you would say in terms of content that's made by luxury brands, something that is very, very classical, that really speaks to that premium and craft narrative, but done in a very playful way. Then you have some of the skits that they run.
Baby girl, Shonda Paul, somebody give it to him, somebody give it to him, somebody give it to him.
And then you have like the purely aesthetics vibe content. So I think what's interesting here is what you see is effectively platform logic in practice. So it is polysemantic. It's diverse content with consistent asset deployment. And like at the risk of like ruining the joke, like ruining what makes Loewe really interesting, like I think what's really fascinating about this brand is it doesn't make sense if you look at it chronologically. If you'd showed this to a marketer 10 years ago, they would have been like, these are 3 different brands. These are 3 very different brand voices and brand expressions. And it's true because it's not a singular narrative. Because on social, it shouldn't be looked up that way. Your brand shows up, as I said, it shows up mediated. It's not TV, content, ad, and then you see 3 minutes of ads and your ad is showing up in the context of other ads. Your content shows up mediated. You're looking at makeup tutorials, performative man content, the return of fascism, political opinion pieces, Loewe ad. And so like that's effectively like the content, and that's how fast you're scrolling through all these pieces of content in like 45 seconds. And you have a consumer that is wanting to engage with different pieces of content at different points in time. So this is actually the same user, but at a different point in time, they may want to consume that content, that type of escapist or fantasy content at a different point in time. And I think Loewe is a really powerful example because it shows how far the discipline of branding has evolved. Luxury brands built their margins on the basis of control. They had the most controlled brand guidelines. They were so strict in the ways that they could show up on who got to wear their products, on what the ads look like. It was incredibly high fidelity as well. And so what you have here is like modern social has effectively flattened everything. Luxury can't be as buttoned up as it once was in the past. It still has to be high fidelity. Some of this clearly costs a lot of money to produce, but at the same time, it has to be fun and open and playful. It has to surrender control. Now, you may say to me, Eugene, that's all very well and interesting, but luxury brands get to play with very different things to the rest of us who work on tech and finance and CPG brands. Well, how about white goods? So let me show you some examples from the UK retailer Currys.
The new Ninja Double Stack XL, out now, about.
Oh.
I saw you walking down on Melrose.
So Currys is a really brilliant example of a brand that has elevated quite a boring category using employee-generated content. They've experienced absolutely stratospheric brand growth over the past couple of years. So, like, this is obviously the Tracksuit data that shows like they've been doing really, really well on converting awareness through to preference. So they've got something like a drop from 82% to 45% when it comes to actually awareness converting through to actual preference and usage. In their own internal tracking, it shows their brand preference is up 5% versus 3 years ago, which is a hell of a lot for a legacy brand. And I think it's really interesting for them as well. They talk about how organic is outperforming paid advertising consistently, and they've built an entire fake store to shoot in. So what they've had is effectively, they've created a context in which their brand can be shown, but it can be shown within effectively like the place that you would regularly see the brand, other than instead of like an artificial environment, like a constructed ad. And then finally, is structuring for creative velocity. So I think this is moving from a brand building style where we are consumed with this idea of a static rhythm. We have a content calendar on social. We're waiting for the seasonal campaign and the seasonal budgets to unlock, to building a brand that effectively knows how to be always on, to building a brand that knows how to respond to moments where it sees it, like an F1 driver, knows how to see a gap, and knows how, when it has something to add to the conversation, when there is a cultural tension out there, can our brand help to resolve that cultural tension by being a part of it? And you're effectively tuned in to what's happening every day. And the best brand for this, I would say right now, is e.l.f. Beauty. So e.l.f. Beauty is an example of a brand that is probably in the modern era understands the cadence at which brands are built. It functions like, I think Zoe Scarman was talking about, she said it functions like an always-on touring band rather than I just have this like, okay, I just have this album drops. Like they're always effectively on the road. They're collecting these cultural moments that feel right and they're thinking, how can I reincorporate this into the brand narrative? So it might be tapping Jennifer Coolidge effectively at the height of her White Lotus powers and running a Super Bowl ad where they created a lip kit to like recreate her signature lip look. It was like NASCAR. They were sponsoring one of the first female drivers there as well. There was a guy called Oliver Widger who quit his job to sail from Oregon to Hawaii and cash out his 401k. And they dropped a care package to him in the middle of the ocean with a couple of e.l.f. products, but then also like cat treats and stuff because they just knew that they were going to get a lot of earned media from it. It's a product thing as well. They found that on social, people were using their like empty lip liners to store stuff in. So what do they do the next day? The next day they released a line of empty lip liners. And they actually sold that out to the public. And I think that when I was at Cannes this year, this chief brand officer was saying, like, we structure our entire team to be able to run things up from any part of the organization that sees something right to the top and execute upon that in one day. The approval cycles and the approval mechanisms are really, really stripped back. It's really more about gut check. Does this feel right? And everyone intuitively within the business is empowered to actually own what that intuition feels like rather than only a very small number of people at the top. And the outcome, this is an insanely competitive category. Everyone knows skincare and makeup has extraordinary margins, but there's also extraordinarily low barrier to entry because production is generally done by somebody else. What we have is a brand with e.l.f. They're tracking at 82% awareness, which is quite extraordinary, but they are at 52% for this is an on-trend brand, which is like second or third in the entire category of all of the brands that are tracked. And in a brand in an industry where the whole thing is effectively built off hype, like with makeup and skincare trends, consistently hitting as one of the most on-trend brands is effectively the way that you win the competitive game. So, to summarize, the old methods of ego and control, this belief that we can somehow control everything, control the associations and the way things come to market, are effectively falling apart in a context in which our brand messages are increasingly mediated through other contexts. We can try to tighten our grip to assert control over someone that is walking out the door, or we can kill our ego. We can surrender control, and who knows, we might just be reborn. Thank you. Sit tight, I'm not going anywhere because Act 2. Let's talk rebirth. From death comes growth. Now, we're going to do a panel. And I'm going to invite onto the stage Lauren Cain. So, Lauren is the head of, in a second, I'll walk you up. I'm doing your intro. Lauren is head of brand at York Street Brands, working across the Breakout Hack, formerly TBH, and Boost Lab, now stepping in as the head of brand for the new haircare brand Bouf. TBH's moment of ego death came via the notorious Gen Z boss in a mini TikTok, which brought both the brand and its team members fully into the public consciousness. And let's take a look at that clip for those of you who've been living under a rock.
Gen Z boss in a mini. Gen Z boss in a mini. Itty bitty cheese in a ball. Itty bitty cheese in a ball. 5'3" in an attitude. 5'3" in an attitude. Secret product in the trench. Secret product in the trench. New friend green and a sneaky link. New friend green and a sneaky link. Fake 10 hands in a hoop. Fake 10 hands in a...
Please welcome Lauren to the stage. Lauren, sorry for your loss.
And Cass. Cass is the brand marketing director for Lyka. It is an Australian scale-up that's effectively challenging the status quo of dog nutrition with real fresh meals delivered. Lyka's moment of ego death came courtesy of a TikTok in which one of its staff was seen eating dog food alongside their pet. Let's take a look at that clip.
Did you just lick dog food off your spoon? Yeah, it's human grade. Wow, that's bougie. Dogs don't need human grade food. It's actually about safety, not being bougie. There's no pet food regulation in Australia. Oh, what does that mean? Well, it means that there are no standards or regulations around pet food in Australia at all. So some brands like Lyka hold themselves to a human grade standard instead. So you just know that your dog's food is safe and like really high quality.
Please welcome Cass to the stage.
Cass, sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Okay. This is the first time I've ever moderated a panel, so let's see how this goes. Okay. So both of you effectively had brands where you faced moments where you realized you just couldn't control everything anymore. To begin with, what was the ego that you had to kill? And what was that one belief or that way of working that you were clinging to? And Cass, I might start with you.
Yeah, so for me, I think it was this idea of being a bit of a people pleaser. And by people pleaser, I mean specifically when it comes to our customer. So when I started at Lyka, I was like, this is going to be so easy because we're in a category that's talking all about dogs and everyone loves dogs. So there should be this one single insight and this one kind of creative platform that we're going to make everyone understand and fall in love. However, the reality is that dog food can actually be quite polarizing. It's very emotionally driven and it's probably more similar to like talking to people about how they'd feed their kids. So I think all in all, this idea that we could stay neutral just because we had such a lovable category was really something that we had to get past and, you know, go forward with something that was a bit more bold, even if it meant upsetting people, challenging the way that people thought, and that's what's led to better commercial outcomes for us.
Was there a particular point in time where you, or an execution where you realized, oh shit, people feel differently about this than I thought they did? Was there a video that you did in particular?
There's probably been several of them where we've gone, whether it's been getting like our vet talent involved, where they've told their story and then we've, you know, maybe upset people in the vet community, or we've said things that go against like the standard convention. So yeah, there's probably been quite a few videos that have ended up that way.
People are weird about dogs, man. Yeah. Lauren.
Yeah, amazing. I think for us, it's very much you can't predict how things are going to land on the internet. Like the internet is such a big place. And sometimes, you know, we have all these plans in place. We have our marketing calendar built out or a launch strategy built out with all of our creative. And the magic actually comes from the response of the customers and being able to be agile and be able to jump on certain trends or certain things that come from off the back of that. And that's actually sometimes outperforms what we've spent all the budget on. So I think it's just being able to be agile and look at sort of what's out there, how people are responding and working out how we're going to cut through all the busyness in the internet.
Yeah, it was one of the things I've been talking with a lot of clients about this year that apparently I'm a TikTok expert now because I post a lot of content on TikTok and they're like, how do I get started? It feels so hard. And I was like, the thing that makes that platform interesting is like nobody cares about fidelity. Like you can have something that effectively is filmed in your backyard that outperforms a piece of content you spent 9 months on preparing, you spent a shitload of budget on. You just never quite know what's going to hit. Like this actually is the case of all of my videos. Now you had probably one of the most notorious I would say one of the most notorious brand moments in Australia over the last year, the notorious Gen Z boss in a mini that gained really massive attention. Not all of it was positive. So I guess from a brand perspective, like how do you navigate this tension between an image or an idea that you want to protect, but then also understanding there are these messy and authentic, but also kind of like contradictory conversations that are following out? Like how do you brand build off a moment like that?
Yeah, I think for us, that was a moment for us that we were like, we lost control. And I don't think you can ever predict for that. As you saw on the screen, it was very much an innocent TikTok that we filmed in our office when we saw it was trending on TikTok. And we do that every day in the office. We have fun. We pull our cameras out. We look at what trends are happening. And we posted it one day. We were all around. The team was coming up with like descriptive words and we thought it was funny. We never thought it would become viral. We literally got it up on our channels and it started to climb. And I think overnight we saw over 1 million views, but the commentary was quite standard, very much like supportive comments from our community. Some people were saying it was cringeworthy, but we're used to that kind of commentary when you jump on those style of trends. But then I guess from there it started to escalate and it landed on X, or as we know, Twitter. And the conversation began to change. So we actually started getting messages from friends and people in the team's partners being like, guys, you're like viral on X, like your team is like coming up everywhere. And we actually had to create an account to have a look at it because none of us actually had Twitter at the time. So it was quite eye-opening. And then we started to see these comments like flooding in. At the time, we actually thought it was quite funny and amusing. And we were like, wow, like this is crazy. Like X is so different to the other platforms. And I think that's something that we also learned, like pieces of content can be picked up and put anywhere on the internet and you don't know how it's going to be received. And we started getting misogynistic commentary coming through, particularly from the US, and it started to snowball and then head on to our other channels. And we were looking at it going, let's do something fun with this. Like, let's clap back at all these people because they're saying all these nasty things. And we were like, let's stand up for ourselves. And that same day we recorded a clapback video, which is very similar to what you saw on the screen. But instead of the commentary about who we were, it was about, we used the comments that were being said on Twitter. And it was very much like, women should go back to the kitchen. We don't like belong in the workforce. It was all of that type of narrative. And I'm so glad that we did that in that moment. I think because it stood up for what we wanted to be seen in that moment. But then it obviously started to snowball, and that's when we did really start to lose control. I think Andrew Tate actually then shared the video on Twitter. And from there, it became a bit more of a storm, and a storm that we had to ride out altogether. And you can only imagine what would come from that post on X. And we were getting, threats through our customer service team. It kind of opened our eyes to the world, and it was actually quite a sad moment for the team in terms of what you could expect. And I think none of us ever thought that something like that could happen. But we went into sort of protector mode. Our leadership team stood up and put in place certain things to ensure that the team were protected, and we sort of folded inward to try and get some of the eyeballs off us. But off the back of that, our community actually started standing up for us. They started getting in the comments, writing back, and that just showed the power of the community that we had built on our social channels, because with that, the tide began to change. The media narrative went from being this, oh, there's a cringeworthy TikTok that's going viral about, these women in the workforce, to why is that viral? Why do men have such a problem with that? And that narrative came from the community backing us, getting into media, being able to stand our ground. And it really came from the clapback video that we put up there to show that, hey, we don't actually care what you're saying. And in that moment, I think it was hard for us. It was a really hard storm. And I think something that we all had to get around each other to weather. But we did end up getting out on the positive side. Once the community came behind us and the media started to change, we then, looked at it as a really big positive, because the people that mattered to us, the people who we were selling to, and the brand and the community that we wanted to resonate with as a brand were there by our side, and actually made that a lot stronger. And now it's become a really big moment for us. We're known for that video. We just had one of our biggest partnerships with Mini Cooper, and it's sort of become part of Rach, our co-founder's identity. So yeah, it was very tough at the time, but we were able to sort of leverage it and move it away to become a positive.
Yeah, and it's so interesting hearing about that Mini Cooper partnership, because it's something that I've noticed across, like, not just brands, but artists as well. Like, that the modern way of addressing controversy is not to apologize, it's to ironically recontextualize the moment. So, like, Dochi, for instance, had the, like, viral Met Gala moment where she was shouting at her assistants when she had the umbrellas pointed out at her, like, you got to fix my shit. And instead of apologizing for it, she turned it into the intro of one of her, like, of her newest, like, Lollapalooza show. And then it's, like, brought everyone back onto her side again. It's like it's almost a recognition of, like, this is the culture that we live in, where everyone's outraged by everything at any point in time. But I get to, as I said, if I don't get to define my narrative, I get to define how I respond to the narrative moving forward. And on that, I'm kind of interested to hear from both of you. Like, these moments are unexpected. What we know of brand is that we try to build things consistently. How do you resource for spontaneity? What does that actually look like? Like, having effectively, like, spare people on the team that you can go, like, let's hop on this? Or is it saying, we think there's going to be a moment coming up and let's make sure we can hop on it? What do you think?
I think it's really difficult. I think in the ideal world, you'd like to think that we're all kind of running at 80% capacity, so we have that little bit extra to give when something happens, or to catch on to that momentum. But the reality is probably most of us are over 100% capacity. So in that instance, I think the best that we can do is really have a set of processes that when something does happen, we kind of know, where do we reprioritize, where are those approvals, what is that kind of gut check that you spoke about earlier that needs to happen. And that's really the best that we can do, because it can be really challenging.
Yeah. And so you had a moment, obviously the moment was people eating dog food. Like, what did you learn from that? And, like, how did you scale from that particular moment?
Yeah, so eating the dog food has now become something of a distinctive asset for us. That's definitely not the first video, and probably won't be the last one that you see us of eating the food. And I know for some of you in the room that might have dogs or might be curious, the turkey is definitely the most delicious one. If you ask my dog, he'd probably say the beef, but, each to their own. But one of the things that I used to really struggle with that, with eating the dog food, was probably this idea that we could control exactly how people would interpret the message. If I asked a lot of people in the room today, like, what do you think the benefit of being able to eat your dog's food is? You would probably say, oh yeah, like, it's signaling that it's good quality. Or, maybe you'd say, okay, it's just for people that are obsessed with their dog and want something really bougie. But the reality is at Lyka, we have such more of an in-depth story that goes into our product. It's about transparency. Yes, it's about quality, but it's also got nutrition elements in there. And when you run something like eating your dog's food, it gets attention. But the flip side to that is that not everyone is going to understand that depth, and we never want to be reduced down to a gimmick. We've got a lot of big goals of, like, changing an industry to do, and eating the dog food for some parts of my mind, I was like, is this just going to turn into some gimmick? But the reality is that attention is really hard to get. And if we can do something that does capture people's attention, then they essentially have that little bit of extra interest to be like, okay, maybe I am curious. Like, what are these people doing? Why are they eating the dog food? And then it kind of hands it over to them to do that extra bit of discovery, because I don't think you can explain your way into someone's heart. You need to capture their attention first. And eating the dog food, I think, does that.
Yeah, I think, like, that piece of not wanting to be known for a gimmick, but also recognizing what is almost like you found the hook. I think that's something that I work with through my own content as well, like trying to figure out over probably like the first 6 months, what's the bigger idea that all of these individual pieces, if I say, like, I know if I say X is dead, something is dead, I'm bound to get more views on TikTok in particular, like, but trying not to be known as the X is dead guy, like, and trying to find something else that you can scaffold to that allows you to actually tell that story or have a signature story to be able to tell within there as well. I'm interested to hear from you too, Lauren, being that the brand was in many ways built out of a viral moment, like, how you thought about what spontaneity might look like moving forward.
Yeah, I think for us, you can't plan for those viral moments, but you can ensure that you build a culture that allows for that. And I think at the Breakout Hack, we do that so well. Every day is so different in the office. We empower the team to come up with ideas and feel supported in running after them. And I think for us, I know Rachel, our co-founder, always says, if you need to throw your content plan in the bin because there's a moment that you can see or there's an opportunity, like let's run, let's throw it out. It doesn't matter if we don't use it. And I think it's just being able to know that they're backed, the content team are backed by the team, and we're there to support and jump in when they need. And yeah, I think that's where the magic happens, when we sort of spot something and run after it. And I think that's we've seen that happen so much in our campaigns. Like one of our biggest campaign launches for a product was our jelly cleanser, where Indy Clinton actually accidentally leaked it, and we had built this full launch plan, assets, creative, and she leaked it like 2 days before our launch. And instead of continuing to run with our campaign, we literally threw it in the bin and jumped on and created a whole campaign strategy off the back of that, and content strategy. And it has to this day been one of our most successful launches. And we continue to work with Indy as well, because she saw how fast and agile our team works.
Which I thought was a very stressful 2 days.
Yeah.
And I think you were talking about how like your content team is back, but as we saw with that video, that was not just the content team, presumably. Like that was the team. Presumably some of them were not from the marketing department, and they became part of the conversation as well. So, and employee generated content is becoming huge right now, because we recognize that they can be a really interesting and effective distributed brand ambassador, someone that lives at the base of the organization, that is actually out there, that's really responsive to what's happening with the consumer. How do you manage that kind of hyper visibility? Like knowing how effective it can be, like what do the guardrails, the frameworks or anything, do you have anything in place?
Yeah, I think for us, it was a really big learning, to be honest. I don't think you can ever predict something like that to happen and off a video like that. You hope for those moments where you think you're going to become viral, or you jump on something, but for that, we just weren't prepared. And I think in those moments, the team came first. I think we had to think about ways to protect them. Our leadership team stepped in and took over their roles for that week, monitoring social media and the commentary coming through, and making sure that they felt supported, and giving them the resources and the support to get through that time. I think it made us more resilient and closer as a team. And it was from banding together and riding the wave together. So I think now we sort of have a little bit more of a playbook, but I don't think, and there are guardrails in place. Like we do ensure now that the team feels safe being in videos. Like before, we would maybe just like pull out our phone and always film, but now there's a lot more consciousness when we go to do that, asking that they feel comfortable being in the videos. And I think, it's just making sure that they're comfortable in that space and they're okay to say no. And now we sort of have a bit more of that playbook. And if we do enter into something like that again,
what might that look like? Yeah. Now, Cass, Lyka's now hit the size where you're capable of running TVCs. I saw them when I was at the gym the other day. You're working with bigger budgets. You're working with bigger agencies. And in fact, I think we have some Tracksuit data here to show Lyka is the purple line. Lyka's brand awareness has tripled in the past couple of years. How are you effectively working to retain small brand thinking as you get bigger? And then conversely, what are some of the ideas that you had as a small brand that you're like, we can let go of this and we can embrace some more big brand thinking?
I think we're definitely still in that scale up phase. And one of the things that we're trying to really let go of, I would say, but we're not quite there yet, is this idea that in order to be agile, it means that you can't plan. As we're trying to scale our campaigns, explore new channels like TV, there just is inherently longer lead times. You do need to be more prepared and planned. But at our core and at our DNA, we do still have that like starter challenger spirit where we want to be agile and do things quickly. And I don't think the two necessarily have to be at odds with each other. So I think that's something we're really working out now. And I've got to say, our agency partners have been amazing at that. We definitely push our SLAs at times, but they're definitely, on the journey with us and have come up with some great solutions to help us do that. So that's been really important. In terms of the kind of small brand thinking that we want to retain, I think being scrappy with our insights and how we prove them out is really important to us and is, again, core to our DNA and how we operate as a marketing team. So whether that's looking at like Tracksuit data, like in the statement section, where we can be like, hey, like, is there something in that that we think that there's, you know, an insight, we can quickly go to our customers or go to our customer care team and be like, hey, have you heard anyone talking about this? And then quickly proof things out on our own channels, whether that is through, you know, testing messaging on social or through EDMs, or even putting a bit of paid spend behind it coming from our brand or like an anonymous account, just to see how things are going to resonate. And I think that kind of small agile thinking in terms of how you prove out messaging or prove out insights can be done really quickly. You don't need to wait until you have this high fidelity campaign to then put it into testing. You really can be testing right from the start to see what's going to resonate the most.
Yeah, I think there was an interesting thing that you said in there about using anonymous accounts to test as well. Like, I think that's such a someone that another creator, Oren John, that I've been speaking to. He's like, yeah, some of the brands I work with have like 20 accounts, and they test hooks on all of their other accounts, and then the effective ones they move into main, and then they recycle the content onto that. He's like, that's how small beats big these days. Like, a big brand simply cannot do that, and like really being able to leverage the freedom and the flexibility that you have there. It's like that's the one advantage they have left. Now, the last question I have for you both. A lot of marketers, and particularly a lot of people who maybe don't work in marketing, still tend to think of social as a little bit of the kids' playground, where like the girlies whip out their phones every day and annoy a bunch of people around the office doing skits or whatever. Like, what would you say to them? Can you brand build on social? And how do you approach actually brand building on social?
I would say absolutely. I think, yes, it's a playground, but that's how we've been able to brand build. It's building that community, letting them in, creating fun and engaging content and moving with the times. I think being able to be agile and adjust to what they're asking for as well. I think if people don't see the success in that, I think they're living under a rock, because I think, you know, that's the way we're moving. Employee generated content, fun trends. People want to jump online and be able to be entertained. So I think, yeah, there's definitely brand building. I think that's where that employee generated content comes, though, from that brand, is being able to feel connected to that brand through those people and really being able to build from there.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time for the marketing girlies and the social girlies, because I think they're starting to earn a bit more of the respect that they deserve in their field. And if you don't believe that you can build a brand on social after seeing so many brands being so successful, I don't think anything I'm going to say is going to change your mind. So instead, I might actually flip it and go, what would I say to the marketing girlies that maybe are struggling to kind of have that value be recognized? And to that, I would probably say that you've got to understand your audience and your stakeholders that you're trying to communicate that value to. A lot of those people are probably not the ones that are going to give you credit for being like, oh, you were so witty in that comment section, or you jumped on that trend so quickly. However, the power of social media is the fact that you have creativity that is almost data backed. You have so many metrics there that you can start translating into business value once you understand what those business stakeholders are interested in. So I think that's something that I'd focus on, because yes, you can absolutely build brands on social. Yeah.
And I think it's so great to see as well that we're getting people like the IPA, like System 1, like APG, and of course like Tracksuit, to be able to start like bringing some data to this as well. And I suppose like that's the whole conversation, is effectively like how, while recognizing that this stuff can't fully be controlled and it can't fully be tracked, like we need something to give someone a hook to. And I think like these are really powerful and useful assets for you to bring into these conversations moving forward. So most of the conversations that I get like yanked into as well are with CFOs that don't quite get it. Like that is like the one battle after another. So I'd just like to direct the two of you now to if you could put your old brand playbooks to rest, and say your final goodbyes to your egos. Please pay your respects. Thank you, Lauren and Cass. Sorry, I'm just checking for time. Are we done, or do we have time? We have time? Okay, cool. The last part of this, I'm actually going to get all of you to talk to one another, because I'm a lecturer at heart, and I always want the last part of the session to be a live exercise. So what I would like you to do now, we're going to do a little bit of a live awakening. I'm just going to give you about 10 to 15 minutes to talk to one another. There are two brands that I want to show you a little bit about today. is Hungry Jack's and Maya, and we're going to do a live rebirth ritual together. Can I get a show of hands of who would rather do Hungry Jack's? Who would rather talk about Hungry Jack's? Who would rather talk about Maya? Oh, good, a 50-50. We're going to talk about Hungry Jack's. Okay, so Hungry Jack's. Tracksuit data for Hungry Jack's shows effectively it's really well known, but it's converting fewer people into consideration compared to McDonald's and KFC and Subway. So it has like really, really strong awareness scores. I think awareness is sitting at around 86 or 87%. But when you compare that to preference scores compared to competitor averages, you've got like KFC, which is my favorite brand, sitting at around 21 to 27% brand preference. You've got McDonald's sitting around 20% preference as well. And you can see when you look at their brand awareness, like they've actually been recording brand awareness rises over the past couple of years, but it hasn't translated into any meaningful conversion or any meaningful increase in preference. And I think when you look at the brand statements as well, when I look at the brand statements, effectively Hungry Jack's sits in the middle of the pack for just about everything. So you have situations in which they don't really have standout strengths on provides fast service, is good value, is tasty, etc. So really they're a brand that's has quite loose associations. And what I would like you to do is, in the last 10 minutes, speak to your neighbors. And I want you to have a conversation with one another, given everything that we've learned today, all of the conversations that we had effectively about ego and control. Like, what are the egos? What is the ego, that this brand Hungry Jack's is clinging to? And what rebirth strategy could unlock its next chapter? Now, I'm just going to give you 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll come back together. Mic check, mic check. Mic check. Okay. Everyone's getting antsy. It's lunchtime. You wanted to talk about things. I think most of the audience is tracksuit at this stage. But I would like to I'd like to open the conversation up. Effectively, did anyone have an interesting perspective on the ego that they believe Hungry Jack's is clinging to? What's your name, darling?
Kaya.
Kaya, that's a beautiful name.
We were speaking about how we think Hungry Jack's is clinging to its hypermasculine kind of ego quite a lot. And we were saying, what about Hungry Jane?
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Or Jackie?
Yeah, okay. So really letting go of just like owning rebellion as something that only men can do.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
I love that. Thank you, Kaya. Anyone else? Up the back. G'day.
We were saying that it feels like Hungry Jack's hasn't really acknowledged that it's not up there with the big guys. Like, it's not in McDonald's and KFC land. It's way down here in these weird locations. You never see it. But they're sort of pretending that the burgers are better at Hungry Jack's. It's tricking us into believing that. That will not be believed. And also trying to pretend that it's flame grilled, like it's real food. We know it's not. We know there's no flames back there. It's exactly the same as McDonald's, but they're sort of trying to trick us or force feed us into believing it's real food.
Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting things like, I'm trying to think about some brands back in the day that really owned a territory around like the Whoppers are flame grilled. And like KFC, for instance, KFC, which I know an awful lot about, KFC, which uses pressure fryers, which guarantees you can fry their chicken in 7 minutes and 30 seconds. Owning that actually Dove is a better example. Dove, which for a very long time was a product proposition of it contains 1/4 cup of moisturizing cream. And there's an interesting thing of assuming that product differentiation benefit is something that is still cared about by a consumer all the way in 2025. And I think there's another interesting piece that you spoke about there of a brand that's acting perhaps a little bit bigger than it is. And maybe there may be something interesting about adopting a more conscious challenger positioning that if it doesn't talk to directly the competitor, is effectively talking about what those competitors stand for.
We've seen, like, on that challenger thing, acknowledging that can really resonate. So an example from a few years ago would be Tooheys Extra Dry, Australia's 11th favourite beer. Like, instead of trying to pretend that Extra Dry is a big player, it's not, and acknowledging where you actually stand, I think can really resonate in Australia in particular.
Australia, what was the Tracksuit data would say, Australia's third tastiest burger in the major fast food outlet consideration set. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? An ego that Hungry Jack's is clinging to? up the back.
I'm from the UK, and I swear Burger King is a much bigger brand than Hungry Jack's. So, yeah, don't know the context there, but that seems like an interesting one to cling to.
It's a licensing thing, I believe. There's a whole. I did it in a principles of business law class many moons ago. But yeah, I think like for myself personally, like what I really feel is that Hungry Jack's is clinging loosely to the rebel positioning, which I actually think is a strong positioning for it to own, but it's only doing it from a product perspective, and there's no real brand narrative that's wrapping up. And I think like probably the most interesting piece for what a rebirth would look like is owning a cultural story around rebellion that can wrap up the product, but can probably talk about that idea of rebellion in more interesting ways. So I was talking with Marcus below here where we were like, what if we had a spotlight at a cricket game where like all of the naughty things that people were doing, like that's a Hungry Jack's rebel of the day. Like what if we were able to take rebellion to like what do small acts of rebellion look like for like, it's not quite KFC, like fuck it, but it's like what does a small act look like for an office worker versus for someone after school versus someone that's like with their parents, etc., etc. I'm getting the wrap it up sign. So on that, just like to thank all of you for remaining. This is how I like to end sessions, with a little exercise, and I know everyone's got places to be, so I appreciate you being there. And yeah, download Tracksuit today. All right. Thank you. See ya.